3 years since the UK's first COVID lockdown, an inquiry into the handling of the crisis is about to get underway. Joining me now to discuss it, Dr Saleyha Ahsan, who tragically lost her father to COVID back in December 2020. Good to have you on the show, Doctor. Obviously, the inquiry about to start. You highly involved, both professionally, emotionally, personally, and you were working, weren't you, in A&E at the time when you lost your beloved father to COVID. And as I always do, obviously, I extend my deepest condolences for what you've only been through so much all at the same time. But I believe you are going to bear witness in this inquiry, aren't you?
Well, that's what my lawyers had hoped. They had submitted, so the COVID Bereaved Families for Justice group have lawyers representing them, highly experienced inquiry lawyers from Brodie Jackson Cantor. They've done all the big inquiries that you've heard of in recent history, Manchester, Grenfell, Hillsborough, they've done them all. They had thought it best to suggest to Baroness Hallett a list of 20 witnesses who would be able to speak to certain elements of what's going to be raised as part of Module 1. Module 1 is all about preparedness. How prepared were we as a nation to deal with a pandemic like COVID? And they have drawn up a list of 20 names who they have submitted to be witnesses. Unfortunately, none of us have been picked up for this at this stage. We haven't given up. The whole point is to help Baroness Hallett, who's the chair of the COVID inquiry, in considering all the facts to actually then help her humanise some of the mass statistics. I mean, there are over 250,000 of us, sadly, families who've lost loved ones. And that's, I mean, to be able to humanise that number is a challenge for anyone.
Doctor, so let me do my best to preempt the inquiry and ask you the question, the one you're wanting to answer. Obviously not at great depth because we have to gallop through this as usual, I'm afraid. But if you were there and if I were Baroness Hallett and I was to say to you, what state of preparedness was the NHS in for a pandemic such as COVID-19? What sort of answer would you give?
So this is what I've been saying all along. I'm ex-military, Vanessa. Yes. I served in the army, 4 years regular, 5 years reservist. Within those years of being in the military, we prepared for every eventuality, including nuclear, chemical, biological warfare. I am still to this day very skilled in being able to put on NBC kit. The first time I ever put on full PPE within the NHS was in anger, which it was on the other side of the COVID red ITU door. The next moment I stepped through the door and I was in it for real. There was no training, no preparation whatsoever that I ever received in my 14 years of training and working clinically within the NHS of being personally prepared for this. And I think generally speaking to other colleagues, my siblings are medics and they work in different parts of the UK, they'd never had any training either. I know there've been central exercises. You hear about them on the rumour mill. We all heard about Signet, for example. I actually don't know anyone that attended those personally. I don't know anyone that attended those. People that go to those exercises for those kind of preparedness exercises are really not the frontline workers, the ones that are actually going to be doing the job. So I'd say,
Doctor, just so that we can grasp the importance and significance of what you're saying, when you did put on the protective equipment and walk through that door, can you explain what it feels like from the inside, what it's physically like, so that we can then understand why it is that you're quite obviously so horrified that you weren't prepared or trained in working under those conditions? Obviously, we hear you say it, but we can't imagine it. So describe the sort of difficulty of doing what you had to do except wearing that kind of gear.
I mean, the whole nation experienced mask wearing and it wasn't a comfortable time for anyone. People had all sorts of different reactions to wearing masks. Now imagine wearing almost like a respirator kind of mask that is stuck to your face. Then you have a visor on top of that. Then you have some sort of head covering. Then you have gloves and a full head to, below your knees coat overall that you've got to wear. And then on top of that, boot coverings, and you can only, you can go into the red zone. You've got to put it on in a certain way, and then you've got to be super careful as to how you take it off, because there's a risk of contaminating yourself at the taking off bit. Actually functioning, I remember the very first time I functioned in full PPE, I couldn't hear very well what my colleagues were saying because our speech was muffled. Trying to do straightforward invasive tasks on our patients. And I was working in COVID, a critical care unit where most of the patients were very sick with COVID. Trying to do invasive procedures dressed up like that for the very first time was a shock to the system, and it was exhausting. I remember it's an extremely hot day, and I almost passed out. I had to hand over to my colleague to take over. That's the kind of stuff we trained for in the military, so that we could put on our NBC kit and function both as an individual and as a team and as a unit. But we never had anything like that in the NHS.
And is it true that you're going off to the committee now, or you're going to definitely be there to bear witness?
Well, I'm going there to take part in the first day of the hearing, like so many others around the country. People are flying in from all over the country to be there tomorrow. We haven't been called. There's only one representative for the COVID Bereaved Families for Justice from England, and each from the devolved nations. So that's 4 in total that will be allowed to speak, that will represent us all. The rest of us will just be there to watch and wait just in case.
Thank you so